So again, I think one of the common themes that everyone has heard, before we jump into that, forward-looking statement, you guys have definitely seen this slide a ton. Make your purchasing decisions based on products currently available and not on future-looking statements. All right, back to that theme. And it's that customers expect engaging and personalized experiences from the brands they interact with every day. I think everybody in this room demands the same from the companies that we like to engage with, whether it's ride sharing with Lyft or Uber, music streaming with Spotify. We demand an engaging and personalized experience. So for me, what that means is apps. And everybody has an app nowadays because that's how we go about engaging with these companies, on our phones, on computers, on tablets. My daughter's daycare has an app. I can go about my day, get a notification, open up the app, see what she had for lunch. Oh, she had an apple. So cute. Text my wife, babe, Harper had an apple for lunch. It's amazing. But again, there's an app for everything. And the challenge is building these engaging, intelligent, responsive apps is difficult. These are 3 pillars that we think make the experience high quality. And what does that mean? So for an app to be personal, does it give me the information and the data that matters to me? Do I know that my daughter had a 45-minute nap at daycare and I need to brace myself when I get home? Is it intelligent? Does it learn from the way I engage with the brand, online, offline, in stores, on my phone, on the website? And 3, is it responsive? How quickly does it respond to how I want to engage with it? One of the things that we know is that most consumers expect an application to respond, as in load a new screen, deliver the right information, take action within 2 seconds. And for a lot of consumers, if that's not the case, if an app crashes, if it functions too slowly, it's not to try again, it's to actually uninstall that application. And delivering on these 2 things takes a ton of work. And the other issue is that most consumers wanted this app yesterday. So how do you build something that meets all of these criteria fast? And the way you can do that is with Salesforce Heroku. And that is our platform for developing modern applications. It has the tools and workflows that developers know and love to use so they can ship apps, ship features fast. It has the services and the tools that IT teams can trust so that they can manage, secure, and scale those applications to deliver a consistent and stable experience for your customers. And together, that lets them deliver on this customer experience at lightning speeds. So today, I'm really excited to introduce Tim, CTO of Dubsmash, to talk about what brands can do with Heroku and Agile Development so that they can ship these applications and the features faster than ever.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Desmond. So before we dive into a little bit on how Dubsmash always is shipping and also in conjunction with Heroku, of course, a couple words quickly on myself. My name is Tim. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Dubsmash. We got started back in 2014 in Berlin, in Germany. That's also where I'm from. You probably guessed already from my accent. And I actually historically always wanted to become an experimental physicist. I know it's kind of dorky, kind of weird, believe it or not. And then during high school, I started implementing mobile applications and other small pieces of software, actually for my own use. So a formulary, a calculator, all those kind of things. And that's when my whole journey with software and with building actually a engaging product that people can actually use to solve actual problems and actually do a little better every day, basically, started. So what is Dubsmash actually? Just small recap for those of you that don't know that yet. Dubsmash is the global internet phenomenon. I think that's fair to say. So by providing you with favorite and very famous quotes from movies, TV shows, but also any other place on the internet like YouTube, for example, We add those to your camera, and you can create those very funny and almost iconic lip-sync dubbed videos that we got so famous for. And most importantly, of course, share that out with your friends. Otherwise, there's no good in all of that. And so over the last 4 years, we actually managed to get over 250 million downloads globally. We have over 6 billion videos created on the platform and, of course, shared as well. And we're still seeing over or a couple tens of thousands of downloads every day. And the cool thing about all of that is that it's not only people like you and me, for example, using that and using that to communicate with their family, maybe like Desmond is doing, but it's also a lot of celebrities, actually. So we were on Jimmy Fallon a couple times already on the show. He had like that very funny actually segment about us. Rihanna did a lot. The X-Men are big fans of it as well, and many more. So it's a very almost addictive kind of fun way of communicating. I can only encourage you, all of you, to try it out after the session, please. So cool. So Dubsmash over the last 4 years has really come a very long way, I would say. We started as basically a simple list of sounds where you could select one and then, of course, create that video and share it out with your friends, but that's basically it. And on the right side, you see where we are today. We're not only a mobile application anymore, we are actually a fully fledged platform nowadays that is centered all around the quote as a format, and of course also the quote database that we have going on under the hood. So you don't only have audio quotes, you have video quotes nowadays. You can create new kinds of content, you can share all of that out. So building a product is really something that is one thing, but building a platform is really a very different thing, as I'm sure the Heroku folks actually know probably the best supporting all of that under the hood. And what I want to do today is I want to share a couple lessons that we picked up basically over the last couple of years with all of you on how we took Dubsmash from that idea we had on the left to where it is nowadays actually on the right, and share those lessons with you, and hopefully you guys can take that back with you home wherever you're coming from and implement that yourself. It's really quite easy actually. Cool. So let's start at actually looking how you can build the right thing nowadays. So if you build any kind of product, regardless if that's a B2B or B2C product or any new formats that kind of start cropping up in the future, they get more and more complex nowadays. Consumers and customers, of course, as well, they have more and more requirements in terms of features and the kind of the scope they expect, which of course is a great thing for us building those kind of things, right? There's just so much more to do. On the other side, of course, you have the problem or the issue that every time you fail to deliver something on time, or you deliver it with a level of quality that is not acceptable for any reason, the risk and the hurt basically to your business, of course, increases quite significantly. So to tie that up, I want to talk about mostly shipping small and very rapid increments to your product today. That's what usually people refer to as Agile Development, that kind of like buzzword that has been flowing around in literally every room here, I'm sure as well. But it's really all about making those very small, very incremental changes and having that continuous flow of improvement to the user experience, basically, at the end of the day. So if you look at that graph, you see it's actually declining quite quickly. So the green line is where you want to be. That's kind of the like perfect world. Of course, it's not always going to work out like that, but that should be the goal. So by really shipping things early and often, sometimes even too early, you make sure that after every iteration cycle, so let's say after one of your software sprints maybe finished, or even after your kind of quarterly planning, if that's how you operate internally, you manage to actually de-risk the whole process and make sure that everything is running smoothly. And at the end of the day, that de-risking is really helping you in getting things out of the door. So of course, shipping things quickly and with tiny increments nowadays isn't enough anymore, because consumers not only have a lot of requirements when it comes to the feature set basically of a product, but they also do have a lot of requirements when it comes to the stability and the overall quality, especially on mobile with internet connections that sometimes are not as great. Users are not really interested in that, right? The only thing they care for is I press that button and I want to see that content that I want to see, and how long does it actually take for me to see that. And the challenge for every business nowadays becomes then to balance that need of velocity with the same need of stability, which, as it turns out, might be almost contradicting sometimes. So building a product can be a lot, and trust me, I've been on that metaphorical fridge a couple of times myself. If anyone here in this room or outside would kind of walk up to you and pitch you their amazing idea, and maybe they even have like a set of wireframes already, or they have like a page-long document with acceptance criteria or anything like that, and would just like hand it over to you and say, okay, here you go. That's what I want to have built. You have 6 months to a year time to do that. Go get started, and I'm not going to talk to you anymore until you're done, actually, right? Of course, you could start like that, but it's not only going to be very overwhelming for you and your team maybe to work on that, but it's also most likely not going to end out too well, because chances are by the time you're finished, someone else probably already had it in the market for 4 months, or the initial requirements just changed a lot, and it turns out that customers actually want to have something completely different. Dubsmash is still shipping multiple times a day to kind of overcome that. That's actually a screenshot from one of our production services on Heroku. We actually have 25 more. I just reduced it to one to not overwhelm people. And that is something that I have to say has enabled us in the past, really getting that early feedback from customers and making sure that we don't only get that feedback from customers, but most importantly also from our external stakeholders. So for us, it would be, for example, media companies that have their content on the platform, and I'm sure your very specific business has a couple of those very important clients or external stakeholders as well. Just as a small example, actually, we've been doing that for the last 4 years. So in the very early days, we actually didn't even ship our app to the iOS App Store. I'm not sure how many of you here today have actually shipped something there. You know, they have that review time. Back in 2014, it was actually roughly a week. So it's quite expensive as a company to build something and then put it up there and then having to wait a full week until you can use it. So what we did actually is we didn't do that. We shipped it using those enterprise certificates. So we actually could ship to up to 50,000 people multiple times a day, easily 10 plus. And every time we had released one of those new beta versions, basically, we would send them an email, and literally within minutes we would get text messages or emails back, or some people even called us and giving us feedback on what might have been not working that great yet, or what features they wanted to do. And all that feedback we actually were able to immediately introduce back into our development process, and really making sure that the product experience basically at the end of the day that we're delivering is as high quality as possible, and people can really utilize it how they want to do it. If you do that, though, one little problem you'll see is that shipping, especially software, always comes at a certain cost. At some point, someone somewhere has to compile it, package it, upload it somewhere, do some final QA, so it's nothing for free. And if you do that too much, you will actually notice that your actual development process comes to a grinding halt. And because your engineering team all of a sudden spends most of their time actually compiling your app and bundling it and uploading it, rather than actually working on the product and concentrating on what they want to do best and what they're there to do. So one thing that has helped us with that a lot is automation. That's probably, looking back at my journey through software, that's probably one of the biggest learnings that I had over the last couple of years. Take a picture of that. The math is actually quite simple. I know it looks a little bit complex, but if you have, let's say, an app that you want to release, and you spend, or one of your engineers, let's say, spends an hour a week compiling that and uploading that to the store, which actually is not that much. The math is pretty straightforward, and how much time you actually can spend automating the whole thing until it's not worthy anymore. And you'll see that really frees up your team and gives them the the freedom and the flexibility to do that. One thing I want to emphasize, though, is that automation is something that is very controversial. So, of course, it's not only important for the kind of high-level stakeholders in any organization to take that into account and actually embrace that culture of automation. It's also important that any engineering team actually wants to fully automate things and doesn't see it as a chore, but rather as an investment into the future and making sure that they can actually spend their time on what they're there to do, which is building a product and building a business instead of something that like deploying things. And on the backend side for us, that has been always very easy. We're using Heroku extensively for that. So all you need to do there is wire up your Heroku app to your Git repository. Ours is on GitHub, for example, as well. You can even do Dropbox nowadays, which I just figured out recently. It's quite an interesting one. And they take care of all of that for you. And even on mobile, where historically the infrastructure is not really there yet, there's tooling nowadays where it shouldn't take you more than a couple hours to set that up end to end and really freeing up your engineering team and the rest of your team in building a great product instead of spending time doing technical chores. So let's talk about where disappointment in software projects is coming from. And I'm aware that it's probably a little controversial, but if you look at modern software systems, they have to fulfill a lot of different requirements. On one side, they have to be simple, of course, they have to be easy to maintain, and they have to be flexible to a degree where in the future you could plug in any given third-party integration, for example, and set that up. And at the same time, though, you also want it, of course, to be stable. You want it to not crash. You want your API service maybe to be always available. And of course, hopefully, as your business grows, you want to have your service and your software actually grow with it. And engineering teams nowadays, they're challenged with balancing those two seemingly contradicting requirements of stability and velocity. If the velocity is too low, you don't add enough value to your product, customers might actually end up moving to the competition or abandoning the product altogether. If the stability on the other side is not high enough, let's say your mobile app is crashing a lot, for example, people will churn immediately. It's amazing how short the attention span on mobile is nowadays, where you have so many apps for everything. So you really need to make sure that you kind of balance those those two and make sure that you find a good middle ground. And the rapid and short iterations, the agile development basically behind all of that, it really helps you de-risking that whole thing as well. Because if you every, let's say, 2 weeks have a check-in point after every sprint and you can kind of readjust your roadmap and get any maybe urgent bug fixes in, at the end of the day, the expectations meet the reality way closer. So the disappointment for you, for your colleagues, and for your teams, of course, is lower as well. So the last thing you want to happen, of course, is engineers throwing things what most people call over the fence, right? So your engineering team works on their piece of software, let's say a month, and then it's release day, and the engineering team packages all of that up, gives it to your operations team or your infrastructure team, and it's like, yeah, okay, I'm done here, deal with it. So operations gets that bundle of software in any given programming language, tries to deploy it to production, and all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And the operations team is sitting there and it's like, yeah, I know we see it failing, but we have no idea how it actually works inside. We maybe not even know what language it is. So there's a lot of challenges around there. The DevOps movement, I'm not sure how many of you have heard that already. I think it's definitely one of the biggest advancements in kind of engineering culture we've had in the last couple of years, at least for me personally always. And that is something that can really help you overcome those issues. So if you want to have your engineering team not only ship early and often, but also being confident in it, you really need to make sure that they are involved into the end-to-end process and they actually know what they're doing. And I don't know, maybe in a perfect world, you wouldn't even need a dedicated DevOps team. Food for thought. So what does an engineering team actually need to deploy something and not only be happy with it, but also not start to dread that dreaded release day 2 months in advance, which I know it's very haunting, especially when you get closer to it. Dubsmash has spent a lot of time in the last couple of years doing research on our own team, basically, and figuring out what that is. And we have identified 2 key questions that you need to answer in order to actually not ship early and often only, but also be confident with it and be happy with it. And those are pretty straightforward. The first one being, how good of a job did we do testing? Is it automation? Is it manual? But at the end of the day, is how confident are we that we actually built the right thing? And the second one being, if something goes wrong, how easy and quick is it for me to go back, and probably also in how much trouble am I in personally, depending on who you are. So that is something that is seemingly quite overwhelming as well. What we have had the luxury to do again is automation. I know I'm repeating myself here, but for the Dubsmash engineering team, building up a good testing infrastructure has actually helped us building software that we are confident in releasing. And if we add a feature or change an existing one, our testing infrastructure can actually tell us if our change maybe has some unexpected kind of side effect on another feature, basically, or another area of the product that we maybe don't even know about yet, because our system starts to get more complex and complex. And especially if you have a big engineering team with a lot of changes in there, that can be something that gives you a lot of certainty as an engineer. And also if maybe you are not directly a hands-on part of the engineering team, but more one of the external stakeholders, it will also let you sleep a lot better knowing whatever your engineering team is doing right now. Maybe they're even distributed across the globe and kind of working 24/7. You have that confidence to go in and look at your CI in that case and get it figured out. So the question then is, that's all fair and square, I would say. The question is, if something goes wrong in the end, how do we handle it, right? What's happening? So we have that first question answered on how we as an engineering team can actually feel confident about what we're doing. So let's answer actually the second question and figure out, if something goes wrong, how are we going to recover from it and make it as easy and seamless as possible, and hopefully maybe not even one of our end users is actually getting to know any of it. I'll cite Master Yoda at this point. I have to say, personally, I think failure is definitely one of the greatest teachers there is. If you look at how QA processes work, regardless if they are manual or automated, at some point you will have some mistakes slip through production, whether that be a bug or a certain edge case that wasn't covered yet by your test suite, or it's maybe one of your QA engineers by accident skipping a couple rows in your test spreadsheet, right? That might very easily happen. So instead of being overly worried about that and overly cautious and trying to make the development process as slow as possible to have enough time for QA and have code freezes of sometimes up to a month or even longer where you just run through the regression tests again and again, I can only recommend treat failure not as the exception, but as the norm, because let's face it, sooner or later it is going to happen. Netflix actually has established over the last 2.5, 3 years the term of chaos engineering. So what they're actually doing is they, of course, have their Netflix system, and I'm pretty sure 80% here in the room have a Netflix account and use it all day, every day. And you probably noticed that the times that Netflix is actually offline over the last year, I don't know if even, to be honest, but it's very rare for sure. So what Netflix actually does with their chaos engineering inside their systems and inside their infrastructure, they have what they call chaos monkeys, which is a program that is really just there to mess with Netflix system on purpose. So it goes in and kills that server or makes that database slower or just does other random stuff that no one can predict. And the only reason they do that is to get that added level of resiliency in their systems and making sure that even if a server actually dies and wasn't killed on purpose, basically, that the system is capable of healing itself and recovering from that. And the same kind of approach you can also apply to your own systems. And Heroku, for example, helps you quite a bit by that, because if you start treating failure as something that is the norm and not that exceptional, you start having a change in mindset where you actually prepare way better for any occasions where there is an actual failure in your system. And because you have that mindset, you can actually prepare way better for it. So you can start putting things in place like canary or blue-green deployments. You can make sure that all your databases, for example, are not only backed up on a weekly basis, but hopefully continuously, and you have a point-in-time restore, basically. On Heroku, you get that for free and much more. One thing I want to make clear, though, is I'm not trying to say that you should make a lot of mistakes when building products. All I'm trying to do is I want to advocate for a change of mind, basically, by treating failures or expecting failures and not treating them as the exceptional case, and that will really let you sleep a lot better, I promise. Okay, so we covered the initial phase of the whole product development process, right? We talked about rapid iterations and de-risking the whole thing. We talked a little bit about how that kind of translates down into the day-to-day work, and then, of course, how to recover from it. To tie that back to the quote, actually, of the fridge and that like scenario where someone gives you kind of that massive project to work on, of course, there is one key question missing with that. And that would be, where do we start? Right? We have a lot of things to do. We have a lot of things on our plate, so we have to start somewhere. And one thing that we found in the past is that if you start working on your V1, basically, on your initial release, it's very tempting to kind of shoot for the moon, especially if you know, okay, in half a year down the road, or maybe a year, we will have those and those changes on the product roadmap, so why not kind of like do them now already so I don't have to do that later? And you'll see quite quickly, once you started doing that argument, you will actually keep doing it. So you keep not shipping and keep adding to the scope and making the whole thing way more complex. That is fair. You will see, though, that the V1, so the initial release, will take not only a lot longer, but also chances are that after a certain amount of time, when you actually do ship the first version and you do get the first user and customer feedback in, regardless what that might be, you will most likely have to do changes to your system. And those changes will be more expensive the more complex your system is. And that's why Dubsmash, for example, over the years has really embraced almost, I would say, an engineering culture of having simplicity in by default, as long as we can make sure that we have room to grow. Because simplicity wins, always, I would say. That's kind of my mantra. And what I always say is that it's always easy to make a simple system more complex in the future. It's usually impossible to very hard to make a complex system a lot easier in the end. So small background story on that, actually, on Dubsmash. In the early days, so October, November, December, kind of 2014, Dubsmash did not have a single server, but already millions of users on our app. How did we do that? It's not serverless, in case any of you wondered. It's actually not even a serverless server. So what we did is we did have a JSON file on S3, that's AWS's storage kind of cloud solution. And every time we would cut new content and put it, of course, also in that storage solution, we would actually download that one file by hand, open it in text edit, put the new metadata in there, upload it back, and then clients would pull that down. And looking back at that, that was mostly due to simplicity reasons, but it also enabled us to handle that explosive growth and that viral growth, if you want to see it that way. And without it, I probably would not be standing here today. So over time, of course, if you recall the before and after screenshots we had earlier, we, of course, had to adopt our system to new product requirements, right? We had that one mobile app, which was basically a creation tool, which had very limited feature set. And we wanted to take that to the next level and actually make sure that we built a full platform. So we added a login functionality, creating accounts. You could send ups on the platform. You can search. There's so much more going on under the hood. So we started adding more and more API interaction. And how that ties back into Heroku is actually that on Heroku, it was literally 2 minutes. I think they just had a session before that on building your Heroku app end-to-end in 40 minutes. And I have to say that's actually true, and they can actually be quicker. And you can start very simple by default. It gives you very robust pre-configurations for whatever language you want to use. At the same time, though, of course, we had to be more and more complex. So very soon, simplicity wasn't actually enough anymore. So Heroku then, in that case, really gave us a flexibility of adding more and more complex and custom features with build packs and custom binaries and scaling and Postgres as well, and really making sure that we can focus on what we do best, which is building a great user experience and building a great product, and let others who have the necessary resources and experience to run a fleet of servers or take care of auto deployment and canary deployments, so we could, again, focus on what we do best. So to sum things up and tie back in, if there are 3 things which I want all of you to take with you and take back to wherever you're coming from to be shipping and build a great user experience, it's those 3 points. First of all, keep it simple. Make sure you always start with the most simple solution you can come up with, as long as you can make sure that you have enough room and time to grow, especially on the technical side in the future. Second of all, make shipping as easy as possible, especially for your engineering team. Make sure that they can focus on building a product and building all those awesome and amazing features that you have on your roadmap, instead of actually going in and doing technical chores. It's like someone would ask you emptying the dishwasher 10 times a day instead of only once, right? Why do you want to do that piece by piece? And the last important one, always be shipping. Thanks. Cool. So I think we have 8 minutes-ish left for questions. I'm happy to answer anything. We do have a microphone here in the middle of the room, so please step up. Yes?
We've been, can you hear me okay?
Yes, or
We've
at least.
been debating about the cost-benefit of Heroku implementations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're moving large amounts of data off to Heroku,
Yep.
And then building a company entirely on data. The transactions you don't fully understand when you first start out. You don't know how big you're going to scale.
Yep.
Is that a risk factor, and how do you deleverage that risk? Scaling on Heroku and then not quite understanding what your costs are going to be?
So yeah, actually, it's a great question because I actually get that asked quite a bit, because I talk to people, and I can tell you from my experience, we're right now probably running easily of 120,000 requests a minute on Heroku, so the platform definitely does scale. But the question is there, and like, is it actually also scaling financially? We did crunch the numbers a couple of times over the last couple of years. What we ended up deciding on is that if we wouldn't be using Heroku to do all of that, I would probably have to hire at least 3 or full-time infrastructure engineers to manage that for Dubsmash, even if we would be using something like a Kubernetes, for example, where it comes for basically free, you know, and that's definitely not worth it, at least for us. One piece of advice I can give you for that as well is really the last point about the simplicity, especially if your product requirements are changing quite quickly in the beginning of any project, right? It's a 80-20 rule. 80% of the work is getting done in 20% of the time usually. You have a lot of ambiguity in there, and you can account for that the best if you really, at every step basically down the process, make sure you only build exactly what is needed and try to not make too many potentially false assumptions about the future, but start simple, and then as you go along basically add more and more complexity to your platform or to your product, and actually figure out what data format or what usage you have actually. Yes.
Yeah, so I just want to understand, I mean, Heroku is a platform as a service model, right? So what decisions, or what went into your decision making in terms of deciding to use Heroku? Were there other options available to you, or was Was that something decided before itself?
There's definitely other options. So back in 2014, when we made that decision, there weren't that many. In the last 4 years, the whole landscape with Kubernetes, AWS also did a lot of things. There's definitely a lot of options. I think if I would start all over again today, Heroku definitely is a very, very good choice. It highly depends, though, I would say, on how much compliance you need and probably also on how much control over your data. I know they're fully AWS certified. They're running on AWS themselves, so AWS takes care of all the data center security and the physical access to the machines. But at the end of the day, Dubsmash has the luxury of being a very consumer-facing product. So for us, the velocity over control factor is definitely more important. That doesn't have to be the same case for any business, though. Anything else? No? Okay, cool, awesome. Thanks a lot.